My fiancé's father called me a gold digger in front of 40 guests at our own engagement dinner, and my fiancée laughed along with him, and I still remember the exact sound of that laugh, because it was the sound of 13 months together quietly ending in real time while I just sat there holding a champagne glass I never got to drink. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how we got to that table before you'll understand why I did what I did next. I'll call her Bianca for this story. We met almost 2 years before that dinner, at a mutual friend's rooftop party, back when I was working a solid but unglamorous job as a project manager for a construction firm, and she was finishing up her master's degree, living off a mix of her parents' money and part-time tutoring work. I fell for her fast, harder than I probably should have admitted to anyone at the time, because she was funny and sharp and had this way of making you feel like the only interesting person in a room full of interesting people. What I didn't fully understand, not at first, was the world she came from. Her father, a man I'll call Harlan, had built a real estate empire over 3 decades, the kind of wealth that comes with private clubs and charity galas and a very specific idea of who belongs at his table. Her mother, elegant and mostly quiet in public, ran their household and their image with the precision of someone managing a business, because to them, honestly, the family kind of was a business. For the first year of dating Bianca, I mostly existed on the edges of that world. Holiday dinners here and there, a birthday party at their country club, enough exposure to understand that Harlan looked at me the way you might look at a stray dog that had wandered into a nice restaurant, tolerated, mildly amused by, but never quite welcome to the table in any real sense. I proposed on a quiet Tuesday evening, nothing extravagant, just the two of us on the balcony of my apartment, because that's who Bianca told me she was, someone who valued genuine moments over grand gestures. She said yes, cried a little, and for about 6 weeks after that, I actually believed we were building something real together, something that existed outside of her family's opinion of me. Then came the engagement dinner. Harlan insisted on hosting it, at his country club, of course, with a guest list that ballooned from what Bianca and I imagined would be a cozy 20 people to a full-blown production with over 40 guests, most of whom I'd never met, business partners, extended family, people who mattered to Harlan's image far more than they mattered to Bianca and me. I want to tell you honestly, I was nervous walking into that room. Not because I doubted my relationship with Bianca, but because I could feel, the way you feel weather changing, that something about that night was going to test us in a way we hadn't been tested before. The dinner itself started fine, if a little stiff. Speeches, toasts, the usual formalities. Harlan gave a toast early on that was, in hindsight, the first crack in the foundation, though I didn't fully register it at the time. He talked about Bianca's accomplishments, her degree, her potential, her bright future, and then, almost as an afterthought, mentioned me by saying something like, and of course, we're happy to welcome, whoever makes her happy, which got an uncomfortable little laugh from a few tables, the kind of laugh that tells you everyone heard exactly what wasn't being said. I let it go. I've always been someone who chooses his battles carefully, especially in rooms full of people who aren't actually mine to fight. But the real moment, the one that ended up defining everything that came after, happened about an hour later, during the open toasts, when guests could stand up and say a few words. Harlan stood again, glass in hand, clearly a few drinks in by that point, and what started as a semi-affectionate ramble about his daughter's childhood slowly turned into something else entirely. He started talking about protecting what you build, about how a man in his position has to be careful about who gets close to his family, about certain people who see a family like theirs and see opportunity instead of love. And then he looked directly at me, raised his glass slightly, and said, with a tone that somehow managed to sound both joking and completely serious at the same time, I just hope our new addition here isn't after the family fortune. You know how it is these days, everyone's looking for a shortcut. The table laughed. Not everyone, but enough people, that specific kind of scattered laughter that spreads because people don't want to be the one not laughing at a rich man's joke. And Bianca laughed too. I need you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to sit with it in real time, because it's the detail that changed everything for me that night. Not Harlan's comment, honestly, because I'd braced myself for something like that eventually. It was watching my fiancée, the woman who was supposed to be building a life with me, laugh along with her father calling me a gold digger in front of 40 people, instead of doing literally anything to defend me. I sat there, my face doing that thing faces do when your brain hasn't caught up yet to what your body already understands, this strange numbness mixed with a heat rising in my chest. I looked at Bianca, hoping to catch her eye, hoping to see some acknowledgement that what had just happened wasn't okay. She caught my eye for half a second, gave this small, apologetic almost smile, and then looked back at her father, still smiling, like the moment had already passed for her. That's when something in me went very quiet and very clear. I want to explain something before I go further, because I think it matters for understanding what happened next. I didn't grow up with money. My father worked as an electrician for 30 years, my mother managed a small daycare out of our home, and I was raised with this very specific belief that your word and your dignity are basically the only things you actually own outright in this life. Everything else can be taken from you, a job, a house, money, but nobody can take your dignity unless you hand it to them yourself. Sitting at that table, watching my fiancée laugh at her father's joke about my character, I understood, with total clarity, that if I stayed silent and let that moment pass, I would be handing mine over. So I stood up. The room quieted, the way rooms do when someone stands up unexpectedly during what's supposed to be a light-hearted toast. I looked at Harlan first, and I said, calmly, that I appreciated his hospitality that evening, and that I understood a father wanting to protect his daughter, but that I wanted to be very clear, in front of everyone at that table, that I had never once asked Bianca or her family for anything beyond what any of us would ask for from people we love, which is simply to be treated with basic respect. Then I turned to Bianca. I told her, in front of her entire family and all their guests, that I had spent 13 months building what I thought was a partnership with her, one where she'd have my back the way I always had hers, and that watching her laugh at her father's joke had shown me something I needed to see clearly before I spent the rest of my life not seeing it. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out the small velvet box I'd been carrying, which had actually been meant for later that night, a small gift for her, a bracelet, nothing to do with the ring at all, but in that moment, with everyone's eyes on me, I did something I hadn't planned even 30 seconds earlier. I reached over, gently took her hand, slid the engagement ring off her finger, and placed it on the table in front of her. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene beyond what was already unfolding. I just said, quietly enough that only the people closest to us could really hear it, that I couldn't marry into a family, or a relationship, where my character got treated as an open joke at my own engagement dinner. And then I turned, walked past 40 stunned guests, past waiters frozen mid-step with trays of champagne, and out through the tall glass doors of that country club, into the cold night air, alone. If you've ever had a moment like that, where your whole body is shaking but your mind feels completely, eerily calm, you know exactly what that walk to my car felt like. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I actually turned the key, just breathing, replaying it, half expecting Bianca to come running out after me. She didn't. I'll be honest with you, the weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my adult life. Not because I regretted what I did, I never once regretted it, but because grief doesn't really care whether your decision was right or wrong, it shows up either way. I grieved the relationship I thought I had, the future I'd built in my head, the version of Bianca I believed existed before that dinner. Bianca did call, a lot, actually, over those first 2 weeks. Voicemails alternating between apologies and justifications, explaining that that's just how her dad is, that I was overreacting to one comment, that I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone by making such a dramatic exit. I noticed, and I want you to notice this too, that not once in any of those messages did she actually apologize for laughing. She apologized for her father's comment, sort of, in a roundabout way, but the laugh, the moment that had actually broken something in me, never got acknowledged at all. That told me everything I needed to know about whether walking out had been the right call. Here's where the story takes a turn I genuinely didn't expect, and honestly, it's the part one think about the most, because it changed how I understood the whole situation. About 3 weeks after the dinner, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Bianca's mother, the quiet elegant woman who'd mostly stayed out of things over the 2 years I'd known the family. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, and something in her voice made me say yes. We met at a small cafe, nothing fancy, which already felt significant given the world she usually moved in. She told me something I hadn't known, something that reframed the entire dinner for me. Harlan, it turned out, had a long history of doing exactly what he'd done to me, to almost every partner Bianca's older sister had ever brought home 2 years earlier. Testing them, publicly, cruelly, under the guise of protecting the family, and every single time, Bianca's sister had done exactly what Bianca did that night, laughed along, stayed quiet, chosen her father's approval over her partner's dignity, right up until her sister's own engagement had quietly dissolved a few years earlier for reasons the family never really discussed openly. If you're the kind of person who appreciates seeing a pattern finally get named out loud after years of nobody addressing it, this next part is going to land the way it landed for me. Stick around, and honestly, if stories like this speak to you, this is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists for, so go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more where this came from. Bianca's mother told me she'd watched this exact scene play out before, and that she'd never said anything to either daughter, because she'd convinced herself over the years that it wasn't her place. But watching me actually walk out, actually place that ring down and leave instead of absorbing the humiliation the way everyone else always had, something about it had shaken something loose in her too. She said, almost apologetically, that she wished someone had done the same thing years earlier, before her older daughter learned to just accept it as normal. I didn't know what to do with that information at first. Part of me felt vindicated, in a complicated, uncomfortable way. Part of me just felt sad, for Bianca, for her sister, for a family that had built enormous wealth around a dinner table where dignity apparently wasn't something everyone got to keep. I told Bianca's mother, honestly, that I appreciated her telling me, but that it didn't really change my decision, because the problem was never just Harlan's comment. The problem was watching the person I planned to marry choose comfort with her father over standing up for me, and knowing that pattern, if it went unaddressed, would likely just repeat itself in smaller, quieter ways for the rest of our life together. She nodded, like she already understood that, maybe better than I did. I saw Bianca one more time after that, about 2 months later, at a mutual friend's apartment, one of those awkward run-ins you can't really avoid in a city where your social circles still overlap. She looked different, not physically, but something in how she carried herself. She apologized to me again, but this time it was different. This time she actually said the words I'd been waiting to hear that night at the country club. She said she was sorry for laughing. She said she'd thought about that moment more than any other moment of her adult life, replaying it, understanding slowly what it had cost her, not just with me, but in terms of who she'd revealed herself to be in that split second, without even meaning to. I appreciated the honesty. I told her that. But I also told her that some moments don't really get undone by an apology months later, they just get understood better, and understanding isn't quite the same thing as repair. We didn't get back together, obviously. I heard, through the same social circles, that she went to therapy afterward, real, consistent therapy, and that things with her father had gotten noticeably more strained in the time since, in ways that suggested she'd started, finally, setting some boundaries of her own. I don't know all the details, and honestly, it's not really my story to tell beyond what happened to me directly. As for me, I moved on eventually, the way people do, slower than I wanted, faster than I expected. About a year later, I met someone else, someone whose family, when I finally met them, treated me like an actual person from the very first dinner, no tests, no jokes about my bank account, no laughter at my expense disguised as toast time humor. It sounds small when I say it like that, but after what I've been through, it honestly felt like the most remarkable thing in the world, just being treated like I belonged at a table without having to prove it first. I think about that engagement dinner often, especially the exact moment I stood up, because it's easily one of the scariest things I've ever done, standing in a room full of strangers and near strangers, publicly ending something everyone had gathered to celebrate. But it's also one of the moments I'm proudest of, not because I won anything, there wasn't really a winner that night, everyone lost something. I'm proud of it because it was the moment I finally understood that dignity isn't something you negotiate for after the fact. It's something you either hold on to in the moment it's being tested, or you quietly lose a little piece of it every time you let it slide. Harlan, from what I understand, still tells a version of that story at dinner parties, though I doubt it's the same version I just told you. I imagine, in his telling, I'm the dramatic overreactor who caused a scene over one little joke. Maybe some of his guests believe that version. I've made my peace with not needing them to believe mine. What I know for certain is this. I walked into that dinner as someone's fiancé, and I walked out as someone who finally understood the difference between being loved and being tolerated, between being defended and being laughed at, and between staying quiet to keep the peace and speaking up to keep your own sense of self intact. Some engagement rings get worn for decades. Mine sat on a white tablecloth for exactly 4 seconds before I turned around and walked straight out into a life that, as it turns out, was a lot better off without a seat at that particular table.